So, like Elisa said, my name is Michelle Biodrowski. Um, I am one of the naturalists with Pottawattamie Conservation, and our office is at the Honey Creek, Iowa lodge up there. Um, so, when when they asked me, when the ladies from the Les Hills chapter of Wild Ones asked me to do a presentation, I was really excited. And then, and then I saw their other list of presenters and how many great experts they have. Doug Tallamy is one of them, Ben Vogt, and I think Heather Holm as well. A lot of really cool people who know a lot. And I was a little intimidated. And I've also, like everybody else during the pandemic, I've been watching a lot of webinars, so I know how kind of saturated our field is with how to plant natives and interesting things about what different species are good for. So I kind of thought, well, what can I, personally give to this conversation? And I was thinking, and I'm not an expert on insects. I'm not an expert gardener. I'll just tell you guys, and let's keep it between the 70 some of us, I'm really not a good gardener. I try, but because natives are so adapted to our area, that is the reason why they survive, not because of my green thumb. So I was like, well, what is something that I could add? And I think based on the past experiences I've had and all the work that I do with other people, that the human aspect of this nice paradigm shift we're having, the slow shift from useless lawns to living gardens that we are slowly building and pushing our society towards. I think the human aspect is what I can add. So that is kind of what my talk will be focused on today. I do have some suggestions on how to get more plant species into your garden and some suggestions on species, but mostly it'll be like, how do we deal with other humans? How can we work together instead of against each other? So that's what I will be focusing on today, and hopefully you guys can learn from it and enjoy it as well. Let's see, so we all kind of know, or most of us, and if you don't already know, you're learning this, that our native plants that are native to our ecosystems, North America, our local genetics, all of the plants that have evolved for millions of years to co-evolved as well with insects. They're all really important and very useful, and they are the basis, the foundations of our food web. So all of the other animals rely on them in some way through the food web. So we know they're really important. They're incredibly adapted to our environments. Like I said, I'm a terrible gardener. I've tried to plant food gardens before, and they just never, like cucumbers, tomatoes, things like that aren't necessarily native to our area. I try to plant those, and they never really turn out very well. But the natives that I select and put in my garden are always so happy and vigorous and beautiful, and it's not really my doing, it is them, because they've evolved to live here. So they're so important to our ecosystem. They bring us endless joy, endless beauty. They make me happy just looking at them and seeing all the beautiful insects and birds that they attract. So I could go on and on about how great they are, but I think all of us know to some degree how wonderful they are. There is a problem, and the problem is that our American standard of what a yard should be, our societal norms, our conventional wisdom, all go against our native plants, our native gardening. It's short cropped, cool season sod only, little lollipop bushes that are non-native. Everything's got to be super short and boring, and if it has any height to it at all, apparently somehow it's a weed. And we know that when you go outside of that societal norm and you decide to do something different, something that's really important and useful, sometimes people are against you, and they will let you know in many different ways that they don't like you doing something different. So there is an unfortunate challenge that we as native gardeners have to go up against. But I think that the tide is turning slowly. More and more people are planting natives and are embracing the beautiful, useful, productive, just resources that natives provide. So people are turning our way, and we are just going to have to keep pushing so that we can have more and more people jumping on the native garden bandwagon. So in order to do that, we have to educate ourselves, and we have to engage with other human beings, and we need to empower each other and ourselves to think differently and be able to venture beyond our standards, in my opinion, stupid and boring cool season lawns, and we need to be able to plant native. So that's a little bit about what we're going to talk today. And I'm just going to start off with a little bit about me, so kind of can get a bit of feel about why I'm here. So I've got my bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and then I went on and got my master's in biology from the same college as well. And during my master's degree, my thesis was to work on patch burn grazing with breeding grassland birds, and how patch burning and prescribed fire and grazing would affect these grassland birds. Just a quick synopsis of that: I looked at dick thistles and I looked at grasshopper sparrows, and the way the Nature Conservancy, which was the prairies I was working on and working with the Nature Conservancy, the way they were doing these patch burns and the grazing is that there was enough habitat throughout the year, throughout the rotations, that it didn't bother the dick thistles and it didn't bother the grasshopper sparrows. They were all able to have successful nesting and to create more of their species, along with the fire, which helps to keep the prairie healthy. And those are the only two birds I worked on, but it turned out to be kind of neutral. The birds didn't seem to mind. So I had a fun time in school. I learned so much. And then I've had a few different jobs before this job that I'm in right now as an environmental educator or naturalist with Pottawattamie Conservation. So before then, I worked with the Department of Natural Resources. I worked at the Riverton site down by Riverton and by Hamburg, Iowa. Down there, we worked managing a wetland that they have down there. So that was fun. I got to learn a lot of different things about management, and got to run a tractor, got to help with prescribed burns, all kinds of fun stuff like that. Then I went and worked with the conservation districts of Iowa, and we partnered with the Natural Resource Conservation Services to work with directly with farmers. And again, in Iowa, farmers who had wetland reserve easements on their ground. So their farms used to be wetlands. Iowa has had a lot of wetlands in the past, and they were a really important part of our ecosystem. And they tend to be really wet, so they're hard to farm. So our government has a program called the Wetland Reserve Easement Program that helps farmers financially and with technical service to turn them back into wetlands. And I helped with that process as well. So a lot of fun. Wetlands are amazing, beautiful. So many wonderful native plants in wetlands. Very, very diverse. And now I am an environmental educator. I really enjoy it. I love teaching. I love teaching people about nature and how amazing it is and helping them to engage personally with nature. Adults and children alike, we all know how important it is to get kids out in nature. I'll tell you a plug right now. If you have kids, if you have friends with kids, if you have grandkids, grab those kids and drag them outside, bring them into nature. They're going to be the people making all of this decisions in our future, and it's really important that they have emotional connection with nature and know how important it is. So then, let's see, that's what I do right now. I am also the current president of the Iowa Prairie Network, and during this stage of my life, I've learned a ton about people management. You would have thought that I would have learned all about prairies, which I do. I have learned a lot about prairies working with the Iowa Prairie Network too, but it's been a lot of learning how important it is to connect human beings with the prairie. We humans have control over what's happening in the world, and so it's really important that we care about what's happening with our natural resources. And just a quick shameless plug, we have our Iowa Prairie Conference coming up. The theme is Prairie Kinship, so how do we connect with the prairie and how is the prairie connected with different species? July 31st, we have virtual presentations, and August 1st, we're going to have statewide prairie field trips. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go onto our website and find out. I'm also a volunteer. I help to volunteer manage our Vincent Bluff State Preserve we have down here in Council Bluffs. It's a remnant prairie, and it is being completely consumed by invasive plants. So it is a lot of work to keep those plants back. Vincent Bluff Preserve doesn't have a lot of planned management, so it's all done by volunteers. So it's a lot of work, a lot of fun, and again, more and more learning. Anytime I do anything outside with prairie plants or with native plants, I'm always learning something new. I'm a beginner. I'm not, again, like I said, I'm not a great gardener. I'm still learning. I have my own native garden at my yard. My yard's pretty small. In the back is kind of my experimenting zone where I keep changing things up, adding new plants, removing plants, and then we just added a new garden on the side of the house, which I'll be kind of talking about a little bit later, but I'm also kind of dipping my toes in plant propagation. So germinating seeds and growing them out, and then giving them away to friends or planting them in my garden. And again, another shameless plug for my 2 corgis who are always helping me. And sometimes when they're helping me, they're smashing my seedlings. So sometimes I help too much. And I'm also a pack member. So I have a wonderful husband who actually helped me a lot with the technical aspect of getting this talk put together today. So shout out to Jason Anderson. Thank you very much for your help. And he's always my emotional support. When I was preparing for this talk, he made me practice. So thank you. So that was just a little bit about me. Maybe too much, but kind of helps me dip into the talk and get all of the nervousness out. So let's move on. All right, so education is extremely important for everyone. It's important for ourselves, it's important for others, and you'll always be learning more. Again, like I said before, unfortunately right now in America, native plant communities, having them in our backyards, having them in our neighborhoods and around businesses, it generally conflicts with our established conventional wisdom. What is the norm? What is the standard for how we want plants to look? So we're going to have to educate ourselves, and we're going to have to educate others on the fact that it doesn't have to conflict. They're super important, and they are much more valuable than that cool season sod that is addicted to fertilizer and watering. So let's see. There are some things that you're going to have to learn about if you have these certain challenges, and we're going to go through them step by step. So as I was looking up and doing some research for this talk, I ran into the Humane Gardener, which is this little quote down here, Nancy Lawson. She has her own website, and she has a lot of really good information about working with homeowners associations and incorporating natives into your gardens. And she says it will take all of us who care about the natural world to keep the momentum for change going. So we got to keep pushing. If you stop, we're going to backslide to those boring yards that are just lawn and non-native shrubs that are just not providing anything for the food web. So we all have to keep working together. And we need to keep a growth mindset. So growth mindset is always knowing that you can learn something new. Even if you're past the age where you want to go to school, you think you've learned everything in your life, you need to keep a flexible mind because you're always going to be learning something new, and you can learn something new. constantly. And when you have challenges, they're actually opportunities, and to look at them as opportunities, look at them as a chance to learn a new lesson. So this is the same with your gardens at home. If you already have native gardens or whatever garden you have, you can experiment with these things. You don't have to go from, a bare lawn straight to a completely finished product. It's okay to adapt your garden and to change it as you go, because you're going to keep learning. I know I have with my yard in the back. I started off by killing off all the lawn and just throwing a mix out there of seeds. And it grew up into like a prairie meadow sort of thing. And like over the past 7 years, I've completely changed it many, many times. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Our gardens are adaptable, and in the real world, the native plant communities would change and evolve over time. So it's okay for that to happen in our yards too. It's okay to change your mind. Okay, so now we're going to dig into some homework. If you do not already have a native garden established in your yard, if you're trying something new, or you're trying to expand it, or you're moving it out into your front yard where everybody gets to see it, you might want to just peek at your municipal codes or your city ordinances. Every city has this, and they're not super easy to find. So here's just an example on here for Iowa City. And I'll show you how to find it. So it's really important to know these things. They're not the end all be all, and they only really come into really being important for you to know about if someone's upset with you and they call the weed commissioner on you, which we'll talk about why people might do that and how you can prevent that in the first place. So where is it? It can be hard to find these municipal codes for whatever reason. While I was researching them, they're kind of difficult to find. They're not super obvious, and they're all kind of in lawyer talk. So what I did is I just go on the internet into whatever internet browser you want, and you type in municipal code, or you type in your city's name. Like I live in Council Bluffs, so I would type in Council Bluffs City Ordinance or Council Bluff Municipal Code. You could also go to this website. This is library.municode.com. Apparently a lot of cities use this, and you'll come up with a map of the United States. You'll click on it, and there's a list of cities that have this, but they're not all on here. That's why I also added, you can just look on it on the internet search. So when you get in there, again, it's going to be a little difficult to find exactly what you want, because it's a whole long list of chapters of everything that the city cares about. So it's not just weeds and weed ordinances, but they're in there. So inside the website that you find, you're also going to want to search again. There'll be a search bar on there, and you're going to want to type in weeds. Don't type in weed, because that's something completely different, and you won't get the information you need. Type in weeds, or sometimes it's referred to as litter. And then you'll get some options. You'll get some chapters, and they're not all the same. They're not all chapter 4. Some of them are chapter 12. Some of them are chapter 17. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a specific format that everyone follows. It's city by city. So you'll look up weeds, and you'll want to find what the city considers weeds. So I didn't list specifically what some of our cities say, because they're all kind of arbitrarily different. Some cities will say plants that exceed 12 inches must be cut. Another one says plants that exceed 6 inches must be cut. It's very arbitrary. But the point here is, how did they define weeds? Because we know that our native landscaping, our native gardens, are not weeds. They're anything but weeds. When I looked up the definition in the municipal codes on how do they define weeds, they say they're worthless plants. They're deemed undesirable, or they have no useful purpose or value. They're a nuisance. Again, not in any way are our native plants weeds. They're the opposite of worthless. They're very desirable, and they are super valuable. So it's good to know this, just because it is something that may be a challenge for you, but it's really not, it does not define our gardens. There is a specific list. So these city ordinances do not list species when they say weeds. So it's good to know what your species are in your garden in case someone does call the city sanitarian on you when they come out and they look at your garden. It's good to know what you have in there, because you can tell them that these are all native plants and they're not weeds. But I just wanted to touch very lightly on that noxious weeds list. So every state has a noxious weeds list, and Iowa has one as well. And they have a very specific list of species that are known to be invasive. And these have started for agricultural reasons, but the weed commissioners where you live are definitely going to enforce you have to remove these, because these are known to be invasive. And just one example is Canada thistle. It's a species that gets into a lot of larger native plantings. They float around in the air, so the seeds travel really far. But they're very obvious. You can tell because they'll take over your whole site. And your smaller native plantings most likely won't have these in there, but you should keep an eye out for them anyways. So it will be a good idea for you to look up your noxious weeds list and to know what those are, because those are actual weeds and they do need to be prevented. So that was a city ordinance, our municipal code. Again, it may come into your life and be an issue. If you work with your neighbors and you work with your city sanitarians, it should not be an issue, but it has been for some people. So I just wanted to touch on where to find that information if you needed it, because it will never hurt you to have more knowledge than less. And now homeowners associations. So apparently, and I've never lived in a homeowners association, but apparently more and more of our population are moving into places that have these. I think it's up to like 20% of the United States people live in homeowners associations, so you may or may not have to deal with this someday. But they also have rules on what they want your yard and garden to look like. And these are found in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So if you live in an area with a homeowners association, you should be able to find these, and you should be able to ask someone, if you can't find it online, ask someone where to find it. But do your homework, because they have restrictions and they have rules and they have maintenance requirements. So you might need to know what they do and don't allow, and you might need to work with them on it. Because your native gardens are going to be a benefit in the neighborhood. You're going to be, if your homeowners association maintains or mows the lawns of the area they cover, then you're going to be cutting out a lot of time and money for them if you have a native garden and not some lawn that they need to come and fertilize or come and mow. So you're going to be saving them money. There'll be less mowing, less watering. We know that our native gardens are like sponges relative to our lawns. Native gardens will absorb a lot more storm water or rainwater than a lawn would. And then, of course, we are not going to be using fertilizers and herbicides on our native gardens. So we'll be introducing less chemicals into the neighborhood. So there's so many wonderful benefits with our native gardens that knowing how to speak to people about it, and if you are going to deal with a homeowners association, knowing how to tell them how important these gardens are and how much money they'll be saving the homeowners association. And if you are dealing with a homeowners association that is very strict, you might consider creating a neighborhood pollinator partnership. So if you want to add native plants into your area, and you could find some more neighbors, some friends, or whomever is around your same homeowners association, and kind of partner up with them, team up with them. It's a lot harder to ignore a group of people than it is to ignore one person who wants to do something new. And if you want to, if you're interested, if you have the time, lead by example. Join that board. So the board that controls your HOA or your homeowners association, they're just normal people. They're just people that live in that neighborhood, and they decided they wanted to have a leadership role. So you could do that as well. And if you needed to, you could help make changes to those rules and regulations in your homeowners association. So it all depends on what time you're willing to put in there, and if you're able to join that board and make some good differences. And I'm just going to say, not all homeowners associations say no to native gardening. It all depends on what they've dealt with before and kind of how updated they are. So for people who are dealing with challenges with other human beings, whether it's through your neighbors, through someone calling the weed commissioner on you, through having restrictive HOA rules, there's some of these kind of old-fashioned ideas, some of these myths that natural landscapes are going to bring problems. And most of these are just simply not true. They're very old-fashioned ideas that have been in many different ways debunked, and there's all kinds of studies and actual science behind why these are not true. So first of all, we know that our natural landscaping can be extremely beautiful. They can look just as sculptured as an English garden. They don't have to be floppy, they don't have to be messy. And if they're done right, they do not decrease property values. If I was moving to a new neighborhood and I knew there was native plantings, native landscaping, that would be a benefit in my mind. That'd be something that I'd be interested in purchasing. But let's talk about fire. So there is a lot of concern for people who don't know anything about native plants. They think that having a native planting will increase the potential to start a dangerous fire. And I'm not going to say no, it can't start on fire, because any plants, if they're dry enough, will start on fire. And if you have thick grasses and you have tall flowers, yes, they could start on fire. Someone started them on fire, but this could happen in any kind of garden. Anywhere there's dry grass, a dry lawn could start on fire. And it's not going to be burning your house down. First of all, our grass fires, our native grass fires, they usually only can sustain really high heat for about 20 seconds. And that's all very, every planting is different. So it's really difficult to say that this is a dangerous planting or not. And just to quote our Forest Service expert, David Seberg, in order to ignite wood and sustain a fire potentially damaging to a home, a grass fire must burn within 4 feet of the home for 7.5 minutes. With the kind of plantings we would do, this would be very hard to sustain. Even if you have a planting right up next to your house. For example, some people have plastic siding, and it may kind of soften your plastic siding. That's something you might want to consider. I really would have a hard time. I'd be hard pressed to say, how could this planting start on fire naturally, unless someone came and threw a cigarette on it or something. And most of our gardens are going to have a lot of leafy green material anyways. Even during the fall and the winter, there's going to be all kinds of cool season flowers in there, duff on the ground. There's going to be all kinds of stuff that would make it difficult for this to actually start on fire. But that is a potential challenge that someone might say against your planting, is that it would start on fire. And it might start on fire, but it's definitely not going to be something that's going to burn down someone's house. Okay, next one. And I've heard this over and over, and I don't know why that people are so obsessed with this. They think that a native planting is going to attract hordes of rats or hordes of mice. And that's just, again, simply not true. Yes, our native gardens do provide food resources, and they're super important in that way. They provide seeds for birds, they provide pollen and nectar for our pollinators, they provide green food for all of our insects. They are not going to make enough, for example, seeds. They're not going to make enough seeds to be able to sustain a horde of rats or mice. It's just not, it's not a thing. A, a small amount of rats and mice, they even need a steady food supply. And our natural gardens, our natural vegetation in our yards are not going to provide the type of food they need in the first place, like large grains, like corn, for example. If you've got a garage that is packed to the gills with corn, yeah, you might be attracting a lot of mice and rats. They could probably live off of that. They're not going to be able to live off of our native gardens. I don't know how much time I've spent in prairies, and I've never ever seen any rats in the first place, and I've maybe seen one or two mice, and that's where they live, in the prairies. They're not going to be taking over the neighborhood in your native planting. That's just not real. Mosquitoes. Oh, everybody hates mosquitoes. And anytime that anyone thinks that anything can possibly cause a mosquito to come around, it's the end of the world. Again, no, that's not going to happen in your native gardens. First of all, mosquitoes need standing water to breed. And even our fastest growing mosquitoes here in North America need about 10 days of standing water to complete their life cycle and emerge as adults. And as I said earlier, our native gardens are like sponges. They are going to absorb the rainwater or whatever kind of water is coming out. They're going to absorb it much faster than a lawn would. So a lawn is going to have compacted soils, it's going to have short roots, and water would stand more likely on our lawn than it would in a native garden. And along with that native garden, you're going to be having the beneficial insects, your predatory insects that are going to be eating mosquitoes. So if anything, you're providing a service to have less mosquitoes by having a native garden. And of course, allergies. Again, a myth that our native flowers, especially goldenrod, people still today think that goldenrod causes allergies. It does not. Goldenrod is insect pollinated, and most of our native flowers are insect pollinated. Some of our native grasses, a lot of our native grasses are wind pollinated, but they do not have enough of the pollen to really make a difference or to cause severe allergies. What does cause the allergies is ragweed. And the ragweed is, we do have some native ragweeds, but it's not likely something that we're going to have in our garden. So there may be challenges with other humans that you need to deal with. Some rules that have been established to try to prevent our native gardening, but again, we're changing the paradigm. We're slowly moving the standard towards people being more accepting of native gardening and realizing the benefits to it. And somebody might tell you it's wrong that you have a weed patch, but just remember that, like Aldo Leopold says, a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and the beauty of the biotic community, which, as we know, our native gardens are absolutely doing that or increasing that. And it is wrong when it tends otherwise, which, in my opinion, the way we have treated the habitat in our areas, in the places we live, the lawns and the non-native plants that provide food for no one, I think those things are wrong. So I'm not too worried about it. Okay, so those are some of the challenges that you might be dealing with on the social aspect. But I have heard a lot that from a lot of people who are just beginners and who are just getting into natives, that it's super easy to have a native garden. Native plants are so easy. You just throw them on the ground and they're done and they're good to go, which unfortunately is not the case. Anytime you have a new planting, there is work that needs to be done. And this is my own quote. Who said this was supposed to be easy? I heard that a lot. So anytime we have a new garden, anytime you make a change, you're going to have to weed. You still have to weed. It's just something we can't get away from. And the good thing about our native gardens is once they've gotten established and past those first 2 years or so, the weeding is much less than it was before. Different from a food garden where you have annuals constantly and you're always disturbing the soil. You have to weed every year. It's different from that, but unfortunately there still is weeding. But some ways on cutting down on that weeding is to do your best not to disturb the soil. So everywhere there is a seed bank of wheat seeds. The seeds can survive for 30 plus years. Something such as mare's tail, even though mare's tail is a native plant, it's kind of one of our weedy ones. But oh my gosh, in almost every reconstruction I've ever seen where they have disturbed the soil and tried to plant new natives, mare's tails comes up all over the place. Those seeds are everywhere. So do your best not to disturb the soil. You do not have to till. Do not till the soil. There's no reason to till that soil. When you're adding new plants, just dig a hole where that plant's going and put it in there. Even if you're seeding with seeds, you do not have to till that soil. You do need to kill whatever grass is growing there at the time, but then you put your seed down and you stomp that seed into the soil, or use a yard roller to roll it in so you can get seed to soil contact. And I have recently learned this. I used to always pull my weeds, things like little foxtail or whatever is coming up. I would pull them because that's just how you're taught. That's the conventional wisdom of pulling weeds. You pull the weeds. But if you cut those weeds, especially the annual ones, they usually do not have enough energy to put up another seed head. Now, some of our perennial weeds you may need to pull to kill that root. But if you cut your weeds instead, you're doing less soil disturbing. So you're going to be, when you disturb the soil less, you're less likely to have more weed seeds germinating. And mulching, again, conventional wisdom. Everybody thinks mulching is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It is not necessarily. I've been learning from the new webinars that I've been watching lately and listening to people who are figuring things out on their own. Mulching is not a magic bullet. In fact, if I may be so brave to say, I think mulching is dumb. You have to reapply it every year if you want it to look the same way. You're constantly smothering the ground underneath it. And you are like, I just listened to a debunking video by Ben Vogt the other day. I think it was a Wild Ones video. And he said that when you're mulching around plants, you're keeping them in a constant state of trying to establish themselves. Because anytime that you're putting mulch down, you're just making this weird kind of island where these plants aren't able to interact with each other. And ground nesting bees, 70% of our native bees are ground nesting bees. So they dig little tunnels in the soil. They do not approve of mulch. I can tell you that right now, because they cannot get through the mulch down to the bare soil where they need to go. They're just little guys, and that mulch is too much for them. But even though I think mulch is dumb, it is sometimes useful. For example, if you've just started a new garden, you've killed off all your sod, and you've planted in a few plugs, and it's your first year, if you put some mulch down 1 to 2 inches, something like that, it is good. It makes it look nice up front, just for your neighbors. It does hold some of the moisture down And it's okay to use in the beginning, but I would not. I mean, it's up to you. What you like is important, but I would not be too worried about mulching. Instead of being obsessed with mulching, let's follow nature's lead. So nature does not mulch, right? Instead, what happens in real life or in our real plant communities is that there will be a ground cover layer. There'll be very short species growing, and they take up the areas that would be bare soil. So this is a photo taken from a really great book that I'm reading right now called A Post-Wild World, or excuse me, Planting in a Post-Wild World. And it's by, let me grab it, it's on my bookshelf. It's by Thomas Rainier and Claudia West. It is a great book. It's Designing Plant Communities for Resilient Landscapes. And they're, I don't know, I want to say they're really smart, but all the stuff they're saying is just like, this is how nature does it, so let's try to do it this way. And it's like, whoa, that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, so instead of mulching, you could choose different species of native plants. And some of these species I have listed here, are available from the Wild One sale that's happening right now. And this is a living mulch, so they cover the soil, they help keep the plants in the soil cool, which helps retain moisture, and they take up the space that weeds would take up. So for example, over here we have a Carex pennsylvanica. That's our common oak sedge, and it's real short, doesn't get very tall, and if it does get tall, it flops over a little bit. It makes kind of a nice ground cover here, no mulch necessary. And we also have one of my favorites. So I was supposed to tell you a joke right now about confidence in saying Latin names, but I don't have that confidence yet. I guess I need to build it up. So I'm going to call it Calarahoe involucrata. It's rough. And then the joke is, so how do you know how to pronounce that? How do you pronounce that Latin name? And then you say, with confidence, because who the heck really knows how these are pronounced? Unless, I guess, you know Latin. Anyways, back to it. This is purple poppy mallow, and it's so pretty. The flowers are just like almost UV. They almost look like UV light purple. They're so pretty, so bright, and they're kind of they're like a vine. They're sprawlers, so they really don't get past a foot, and they sprawl around, and they like that full sun and the real dry soil. So if you have a real dry spot, these are a great plant to add. And down here is an anemone canadensis, or a meadow anemone. These, again, also very pretty. This picture doesn't do it justice. I really was going for showing how it's kind of like a mat. But they've got the cutest little white flowers, and their leaves are so pretty and so interesting looking. They just add a lot of interest. And of course, they add a lot of valuable resources for our native, our bees and our butterflies needing that nectar and that pollen, and of course all of the different insects that they can be host to. So instead of just throwing a bunch of wood pieces all over the ground, you can add more plants to your garden by having a living mulch ground level. Oops, I forgot, I get to zoom in. So here's a nice closer picture of our common oak sedge. And then here's our purple poppy mallow with those intense purple flowers, purple pink. And then there's our meadow anemone. Very pretty. Okay, so we're just going to continue following nature's lead. So instead of mulching, we can add those shorter growing species to the bottom layer. And then in between there is a seasonal theme layer. So species that are mid-height, not super tall yet, but maybe 1 to 3 to 4 foot tall, somewhere in between there. And you want to choose species that bloom throughout the whole growing season. So some species could be blooming in the early spring, especially good for our early queen bumblebees that are starting their new hives. And then we want species, of course, that bloom in the summer and species that bloom in the late fall. And I've chosen just a few of those. Again, these are available at the Wild One sale that Elisa told you about. So actually going to use my zoom this time. This is Aquilegia canadensis. Yeah, I said it that time with confidence, so now you all think I know how to speak Latin. Very beautiful wild columbine, gorgeous plants. These are good from moist to dry areas. They're very resilient and can grow in a lot of different places. Those bloom in about late spring. This one is Pycnanthemum. Pycnanthemum. Dang it, I lost my confidence. Virginianum. This is mountain mint. Gets up to about 3 feet. Very pretty, bright white flowers. Looks kind of similar to, in my mind, to bergamot, the taller purple one with their seed heads. They're just kind of cool looking. Again, full to partial sun. Very, you could plant these almost everywhere. They like moist to medium soils. They get about 3 feet or so. These are blooming in the summertime. And this one is Symphotrichium nova Anglae, our New England aster. These are kind of bush-like in my mind. They have like a bush-type form where they grow up and they're kind of in a vase shape. These in my yard, they grow everywhere. They're very versatile. Part to full sun, moist to medium soil. They get about 4 foot tall. They're a little taller, but I just see millions of butterflies on these babies, and they're blooming pretty late into the fall. All right, we keep moving up the chain here. Now we're up to the taller, the structural layer. So this would be our tall forbs or our tall grasses. For example, we have I lost it off the tip of my tongue. Joe Pye weed right here, or maybe some kind of a tree, some kind of a pretty red bud tree. That would be pretty. So again, some of the species that are available at the Wild Ones plant sale is the sweet Joe Pye right here. This is actually in my backyard right now. Of course, it's not growing just yet. Still dormant, but this gets pretty tall. This is like a grand, hey, look at me in the middle of the garden kind of thing. It gets up to 3 foot tall. It's Eupatorium purpureum, or sweet Joe Pye. Partial sun, moist to medium soils. Again, just a butterfly magnet. They just love it. And then one of my new favorites is New Jersey tea, or Ceanothus americanus. It's a shrub or a subshrub. It's one of our native shrubs. It doesn't get very tall, up to 3 foot, but it can get pretty bushy. Likes full sun, medium to dry soils. Really pretty white flowers. So there's always going to be an opportunity to learn, right? Just learning about new plants, new ways of getting plants into your garden, cutting down on needing to weed by using different methods, working more with nature by cutting back on mulch a little bit, letting the ground show up for those ground nesting bees, and incorporating living mulch species instead of dead tree mulch, I guess you would say. So keep an open mind, keep your growth mindset, because there's always going to be something new that you can do. So now it's really important to educate ourselves and others, but we also need to be able to engage with other human beings. Now, I am a good example, because when I was young, and even to this day, I was like, humans are dumb. I'm antisocial. I don't want to deal with other people. But I guess, unfortunately and begrudgingly, I became more and more of a people person, because I've realized how important it is to make connections with people. There's never a time when one person is enough, unfortunately. I guess unless you're talking about a personal relationship. But when you're talking about making change in the world, we all need to work together, and we can't work together unless we are engaging with each other. And this is how we are going to spread habitat, how we're going to spread the native plant landscaping, is by engaging and working with other people. So we're going to gather others to our cause by reaching out. And this is how we continue to push that shift from the conventional wisdom, from the societal norms of today, into real life planting with natives and landscaping, and having habitat in your yard instead of a void. So let's talk about engaging. Again, engaging with your neighbors, engaging with your community. This is how we're going to spread the habitat from just our own backyards, which in the grand scheme of things, it's not enough just for us to have a beautiful, important landscape in our own yard. It needs to spread to others as well. So it's really important to actually engage with people instead of staying in your own little bubble, although sometimes it just sounds like a wonderful thing to just be by yourself. And another great quote from Fred Rogers, aka Mr. Rogers, who was really, really good at saying, "Won't you be my neighbor?" because he knows the value of humans engaging with other humans. He says, all of us at some time or another need help. Whether we're giving or receiving help, each one of us has something valuable to bring to this world. And that's one of the things that connects us as neighbors. In our own way, each one of us is a giver and a receiver. So just starting with the easiest, connect with like-minded people for support and for learning. Facebook has a million different garden groups, native plant groups, pollinator groups. There's all kinds of great listservs. The Iowa Native Plant Society is one that I really enjoy. And again, shameless plug, the Iowa Prairie Network, our Facebook group is just, it's great. I'm so happy about how it's turning out. There's people constantly having conversations about, when are these things blooming? Have you seen this before? How do you get this plant? So working on the internet with social media is a good start to find people who are already feeling the way you're feeling and who want to make a difference. So one good reason to connect with your neighbors is that our weed laws are complaint driven. So those municipal codes that say weeds have to be under 12 inches or you're going to get in trouble. Well, those sanitarians are not cruising the neighborhoods looking for people who have tall plants. The only times they come out, and I've spoken to the sanitarians in Council Bluffs directly about this, they said the only time they come out is when someone calls and complains. That is when they come and look at your yard. So if you have a good, at least working relationship with your neighbors and they know that you have a native garden and not just a garden full of tall plants, you're much less likely to have someone call on you. So Ben Vogt, another great guy who has a lot of really good ideas about native plantings, this is his quote about reaching out to your neighbors. He says, talk to them. I know sometimes you're just like, I hate my neighbors, but the least you can do is talk to them about your garden. Tell them what you're doing. If you like them, invite them over for drinks. This is what I really like. Don't accuse anyone or anything of acting like you're better than them. So just because you know how important native gardens are and they don't yet, please do not be condescending to them because you are only going to turn them off to native flowers and native plants, and unfortunately to you. So be open, be welcoming, educate, teach, and welcome your neighbors. And then once you get your neighbors on board, if you want to, expand your reach to the rest of your community. You can get your local businesses involved. You can get community leaders, parks. We can spread our native plantings everywhere, which we need to if we want to help save our species, like our monarch butterflies. We need to get those milkweeds everywhere. So that was the active engaging with people, right? Getting out and actually talking to someone, saying hello, saying, hey, check out my garden, check out these cool flowers. If you have extra flowers, share them with someone, spread those native plants. This is a passive way of doing it. I won't say equally important, but very important because you can't always be around, right? And I love signs. Signs are advertising all of your hard work for you. When you're in the phase of killing off that stupid lawn grass, right? And it looks really bad and all dead. Put out a sign. Say, hey, prairie planting in progress, or pollinator garden in progress, excuse our mess, or something silly and cute like that, just so people know what you're doing. And then these signs here are actually from my new garden that we just planted last year. You can still see the dead lawn in here. I painted this one. It's not the best painting ever, but it's just silly and cute and just lets people know, hey, this is a pollinator garden. Bees eat here. Just to get people, just to attract their eye. So they're not just seeing, they're not having that green wash, right? Where a lot of people are plant blind. If they're not already big plant fans, they don't see plants for what they are. They just see something messy, right? But if you catch their eye and you tell them with a nice professional sign like this one, this is a native wildflower planting, most people know what the word pollinator is. Most people know what wildflowers are, and they know that those are good things. And I plug this down in here. You do not have to till. Don't till if you don't have to. Just plant I planted all of these plants, these live plants, directly into this dead grass. And I will have some weeding to do this year. I didn't put any mulch down. I did put my dead leaves from my trees down over the fall, but there'll be less weeding than if I had disturbed that soil. Borders. So borders are going to immediately tell people it's psychological. It's going to tell them this is a garden. Humans, for whatever reason, like things to be contained. So you could do that by having a mown sod. So this is just the old grass that we didn't kill off. You can mow that into a nice frame. This is actually right here. This is our neighbor's driveway. So what we're doing with this void space here is we're giving some space between our taller native plants in our neighbor's driveway, because this is where they walk up to get into their car. So it's just a nice, it's a respectful distance from their yard, so our plants are not flopping over into the place they need to walk, which is important to set back. So set back your gardens from the walkways, from the sidewalks, from your neighbors. Give them some space. Put a frame around your garden. Like we just have some pieces of lumber here that we used to make a nice frame. You can use mulch to frame if you want, or use shorter species on the outside of the garden. Again, this is the first year of this garden. So I had just planted it this year, so there's still a lot of void space, but it'll fill up with plants soon. Just gotta keep on top of the weeds so they don't get out of hand. But just use this psychology against everyone, or for them, right? To let them know this is a garden. And if you want to get really deep into this, if you have the time and interest, take a landscape design class. There's all kinds of beautiful things you can do with gardens. They do not have to look like sloppy messes. Just because they're native does not equal messy. And if you have a very organized, very structured garden, it's still going to provide a ton of ecosystem services if they are native plants. All right, so we're cruising now. I know this is getting a little long, but I'm getting towards the end, so hang on with me. So we've gone through educating ourselves and others. We know how important it is to engage with people actively and passively. And now let's talk about empowering each other. Let's empower ourselves and empower each other, because we need to empower each other to think outside of the box. Instead of sticking to the societal norms, we need to start emulating nature and providing for the food web. And we can be different because we know that different or diverse is a good thing, right? It's good. All right. I think I just said this. We know that we can do it, but sometimes we need help. We can help each other. So here's just a quick metaphor that I thought was really deep and makes a lot of sense. So these two things are different. Here's my elephant. This is for my metaphor. And then this quote is just echoing the metaphor. So I'll just read the metaphor to you real quick, and you might have already heard this before. So a young family was at the circus, and they saw some huge elephants. These elephants were only tied with a small rope around their leg. One of the children of this family was asking their parents, how are these giant elephants being held back by these tiny little ropes and not making any attempts to get away? There was a trainer nearby, so the parents asked the trainer. The trainer said, when they were very young and much, much smaller, we used the same size rope to tie them. And at that age, it was enough to hold them back. They couldn't get away. And as they grew up, they are conditioned to believe they cannot break away. They believe the rope can still hold them, so they never try to break away. So like these elephants, how many of us go through life hanging on to a belief that we cannot do something different simply because we may have failed at it once before? We should know that failure is a part of learning. We can never give up the struggle in life. So this, in my opinion, ties directly with this quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is an incredible guy too. If you ever look into what he's done in the past, he's done a lot of great things. But this is my favorite quote. The mind, once stretched by a new idea, never returns to its original dimensions. Once you learn what native plants are and how important they are to us, you'll never see someone's native garden as weeds again. Once you learn about invasive plant species, or you learn about anything new, you're going to see the world differently. So it's really important that we are able to work with each other and empower each other. If we think that we can be stopped by these small ropes that are holding us back, we're not going to be able to shift the paradigm of our even something as small as landscaping, right? We won't be able to shift it to having these super ecologically important landscape plantings. We need to be able to know that we can do it. Excuse me, I had to get a drink of water. So working with people is super important. And if you educate yourself and others, you're going to know that you are increasing your power. If you are engaging with other people, you are connecting with them and you are making a more powerful group. And being able to let people know that we can unlearn that rope, that we can change the way we do things. We don't have to stay and do what society tells us or has been telling us. We can change and we can do a lot of things. We have the power to change the standard, right? That standard yard that's just lawn and nothing good. We have the power to make those changes. Because my yard's not enough, your yard is not enough. We have to do more. And unfortunately, like Elisa told us earlier, how we're losing our monarch butterfly populations, there are real consequences for us having changed all of this habitat into lawns. And I'll just give you one more quote, because this one is a real one, just like all of them, by Margaret Mead, another wonderful person. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed it is the only thing that has. And it's true. Just regular people like you and me trying to make a difference. All right, well, that was my spiel for you. So I think hopefully we have time for some questions.